Hi everyone, I'm Rishabh. My co-author Rajat and I will be presenting SPARCS, structuring physically assistive robotics for caregiving with stakeholders in the loop. Nearly 190 million people in the world live with some form of motor impairment. Robots have the potential to help them with their activities of daily living. However, existing research has been restricted to a select few labs. Democratizing this field can accelerate progress in building caregiving robots. But the road to democratization is hindered by two major challenges. Firstly, a lack of structure and problem definitions. Having a common structure would enable us to reason about similarities across different caregiving scenarios, thus promoting reusability. Well defined problem statements should specify the constituents of a caregiving scenario and capture the caregiving needs. Secondly, it is currently very challenging for roboticists to get access to stakeholders from the caregiving community who have the required domain knowledge. To address these challenges, we propose SPARCS, a framework comprising three components: building blocks that define the constituents of robot caregiving scenarios, structured workflows that help identify caregiving needs and use them to build a robot, and SPARCS Box, a web app that facilitates communication between all stakeholders. Building a physical caregiving robot with SPARCS involves leveraging these components through a five-step process. Now let us discuss the three components. Building blocks are inspired from human caregiving, which is contextual on various factors. It is contextual on the care recipient's functioning abilities. John on the left and Morgan on the right have different upper body mobility limitations and thus have different caregiving needs when being fed. Caregiving is also contextual on the care recipient's behavior. John prefers making minimal neck movement, while Morgan turns towards his caregiver to show his intent of taking a bite. Caregiving is contextual on the caregiver as well. Spencer and Riley have different physical capabilities and thus perform the same task of sliding up the pants differently. Finally, caregiving is contextual on the environment. The method used for transferring Morgan is widely different with and without a serra lift in the environment. In addition to these, robotic caregiving is also contextual on the robot. We call these components building blocks and define them using their corresponding models. In the paper, we share their definitions and also discuss how prior work can be used to instantiate these models. Given the building blocks, the missing piece is now to identify and specify caregiving needs in a structured manner. For a given robot caregiving scenario, we propose to first consider a similar human caregiving scenario. We consult stakeholders to identify the set of assistive tasks that their caregiver must perform. We call this the task workflow for human caregiving. Using the caregiving needs identified from this workflow, we keep the stakeholders in the loop and generate the task workflow for robot caregiving. We specify the structure of task workflows as hierarchical state machines comprising textual descriptions of the assistive tasks at various levels of abstraction, which we detail in the paper. Once we know the tasks, the focus can now shift to answering how to program a robot to perform them. We call this implementation the action workflow for robot caregiving. Creating these structured workflows requires getting access to other stakeholders, which is very challenging. To alleviate this problem, we propose SPARCS Box, which allows stakeholders to easily instantiate building blocks, propose workflows for different ADLs, and discuss them with other stakeholders.
Now that we have discussed the components of SPARCS, let us see how we use SPARCS in practice. We demonstrate this 5-step process for a caregiving scenario where the user is focusing on the television while being fed. Steps 1 and 2 focus on identifying the caregiving needs of the user. The first step is to instantiate the building blocks for human caregiving. Step 2 involves communication between stakeholders using SPARCS Box to create the task workflow for human caregiving. Let us look at this caregiving scenario. On a high level, this activity of feeding can be broken down into two composite tasks: bite acquisition, which is acquiring a food item, and bite transfer, which is transferring it to the care recipient's mouth. On a closer look, we can further split the composite tasks into various tasks. For instance, bite transfer breaks down into 4 tasks: move in front of care recipient, wait until mouth is open, bring food item close to mouth, and then the care recipient takes a bite. Once we have identified the caregiving needs, steps 3 to 5 focus on building a physical caregiving robot. In step 3, we instantiate the building blocks for robot caregiving. Given these building blocks, the next step is to use the task workflow for human caregiving on SPARCS box to propose and obtain feedback on the task workflow for robot caregiving. Lastly, step 5 focuses on implementing the tasks from the workflow obtained in the previous step to build the action workflow for robot caregiving. Now, what if another lab wanted to adapt this robot to a different caregiving scenario? In our paper, we show how SPARCS allows us to reuse and transfer insights from this scenario to other ones, having a user with a different functionality and behavior, an environment with a social context, and a robot model having more degrees of freedom. Finally, with the hope of initiating a community-wide effort to build caregiving robots, we identify realistic robot caregiving problems centered around 6 real care recipients with varying functional abilities and determine 19 caregiving scenarios that they need assistance with. For each scenario, we perform steps 1 and 2. For step 1, we instantiate corresponding building blocks. Particularly for modeling their functionality, we collect clinical data on their body dimensions, weight, active and passive range of motion of their joints, and manual muscle testing. For step 2, we interview 9 healthcare professionals and record the task workflows for the 19 caregiving scenarios. All this information is publicly available on SPARCS box. To aid roboticists with performing steps 3 to 5, we additionally reach out to stakeholders to better understand their perspective on building caregiving robots for these problems and share our findings as open challenges for the community. Thank you.